I never thought I'd let someone in again, not after everything life had thrown at me. At 24, I was already exhausted, worn down by responsibilities that felt heavier than my years. Living alone in a small apartment, juggling 2 jobs, and barely keeping up with bills, I had grown used to silence, the kind that crept into the walls and settled into my bones. I didn't cry often. I didn't have time to, but there were nights when I sat in the dark, wondering if anyone could see how close I was to breaking. Then he appeared, like he always had, but suddenly different. He was just 20, a friend I'd known through family for years. Young, full of energy, always talking about the future with a light in his eyes I'd forgotten existed. He'd stop by with a casual, "Need help with anything?" and I'd shrug it off. I didn't want to be a burden, but he didn't wait for me to say yes. He just started helping, taking out the trash, fixing the leaky faucet, even bringing food he'd cooked, because, as he said with a grin, you forget to eat. At first, I brushed it off as kindness. That's what friends do, right? But something in his presence made my chest feel less tight. He never asked questions I didn't want to answer. He didn't look at me with pity. He laughed like life was still good, and somehow made me laugh too. One evening, I came home, drained to my core, only to find him outside my door with a bag of groceries and a lopsided smile. "You looked tired yesterday. Figured you might need a little help." And I did, more than I admitted. We started spending more time together, often without planning to. He'd walk with me to the store, sit with me on the balcony, talk about dreams and music and memories that made us both laugh. I began looking forward to those moments, the way his voice softened when he talked to me, the way he noticed things others didn't, like how I always rubbed my temples when I was anxious, or how I avoided certain songs that reminded me of things I didn't speak about. One night, after helping me clean up the kitchen, he lingered. The air between us shifted. He wasn't saying much, just standing near the door, looking at me with something I couldn't name. There was a silence, but not an awkward one. It felt full, like a question hanging in the air. I held his gaze for a moment too long, then looked away, heart thudding harder than I expected. He smiled, almost like he understood, and said softly, "I'll see you tomorrow." And just like that, he was gone. But the warmth stayed, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. Something was changing. Slowly, quietly, and I wasn't sure what it was yet, but I didn't want it to stop. He started coming around more often, not out of obligation, but with ease, like it was the most natural thing in the world. There was never a formal invitation, yet his presence fit into my routine like it had always belonged. We spoke more, longer conversations, deeper ones. He'd ask things that made me think, things no one else bothered to ask. I told him about the dreams I had once before I got caught up in surviving. And he listened like they still mattered, like I still mattered. He had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the world when he looked at me. I began noticing the small things, the way his eyes lingered a second too long when I smiled, the way his voice changed, gentler, lower, when we talked late into the night. There was a closeness forming between us, quiet and unspoken, but undeniable. I could feel it in how he remembered everything I said, how he always knew when I was overwhelmed and needed space without ever being told. One night, I laughed at something he said, and he looked at me in a way that made my breath catch. Not intense, not overwhelming, but soft, like he saw something beautiful I didn't even know was there. It left a silence between us, one filled with everything we hadn't said yet. I looked away too quickly, unsure of what I was feeling. But it stayed with me. The way his eyes didn't look away, immediately, the way my chest tightened for reasons I didn't want to admit. As the days passed, I caught myself thinking about him more, when he wasn't around, when I was doing the most ordinary things. I'd remember how he teased me about how I stir my coffee, or how he always let me have the last piece of anything we shared. I didn't want to overthink it, but it was hard not to. He was younger. He was my friend. And yet, something had changed. Or maybe it had always been there, just waiting to be noticed. One evening, we walked back from the market, sharing an umbrella under a slow, steady rain. Our arms brushed as we walked, and neither of us moved away. My heart pounded harder than the rain on the pavement. I didn't speak, afraid my voice would give me away, but I could feel his eyes on me, not demanding, just waiting, hoping. I said nothing. He didn't press. That silence said everything. And that night, when I closed my door behind me, I leaned against it and let the weight of it all settle in. I was falling, carefully, quietly, but undeniably, and it terrified me, because I had no idea what came next, only that I no longer wanted to pretend I didn't feel what I felt. I didn't know how to define what was happening between us, but I knew it was no longer just friendship. Something real had taken root, something deeper than I could hide from. Every time he showed up, I felt a part of me come alive, like I had forgotten how to feel that kind of warmth. It wasn't just his help, his words, or even his smile. It was the way he saw me. Not for what I had been through, but for who I still was underneath it all. And more importantly, he made me start seeing that version of myself too. We never labeled anything, but our moments spoke louder than any words. He sat a little closer now, lingered a little longer. There were pauses in our conversations that felt like invitations. And I didn't step away. I stayed. I watched how his eyes softened when I spoke about the things that scared me. I noticed how he never rushed me, never pushed me. He just made room for me, as if he knew I needed space to grow back into myself. One day, after a quiet dinner, he leaned forward and told me he admired how strong I was. But it wasn't the kind of praise that felt like a compliment out of pity. It felt real, earned. He said he saw how hard I worked, how much I carried on my own, and that he just wanted to be someone I didn't have to carry things alone with. Those words settled in me differently. Not dramatic, not romantic in the traditional sense, but powerful. Because in that moment, I realized I didn't want to carry everything alone anymore either. From that night on, I started letting him in more. I told him stories I hadn't shared with anyone. I let him see the parts of me I usually kept guarded. He didn't try to fix me. He just listened, and sometimes that was all I needed. His silence was safe, not empty. He didn't look away when I talked about pain. He stayed right there, eyes steady, as if to say, I'm not going anywhere. And that changed something in me. I stopped pretending I didn't care. I stopped questioning whether this was right or wrong. What we were building didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like a beginning. We didn't talk about love, not directly, but it was there in the way he checked in during the day, in the way he always made sure I smiled before he left. It was in the way he showed up, consistently, quietly, and without expecting anything in return. There was a peace in it, the kind that doesn't scream or make grand gestures. Just the quiet certainty that someone sees you, chooses you, and stays. And in that stillness, I started choosing him too. Not out of loneliness, not out of gratitude, but out of something much truer, something I was finally ready to embrace.